Welcome to the Concordia Publishing House Podcast, where we consider everything in the light of Jesus Christ, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I'm your host, Elizabeth Pittman. On today's episode, I'm pleased to welcome Peter Reske back to the CPH podcast. Instead of being a guest today, as he has been several times in the past, Peter's going to slide into the co-host chair for our conversation with Dr. Jeffrey Blersch. Dr. Blersch is Associate Professor of Music and the University Organist at Concordia University Nebraska. Today, we're going to be chatting about all things music, church music, composition. I learned a lot during this conversation, and for those of us listening that are not church musicians, I think you'll learn a lot too and enjoy the conversation with Jeff. Before we start our conversation with Jeff Blersch, I'd like to thank our friends at the LCMS Foundation for their support of the CPH podcast. How can your congregation turn significant financial gifts into a long-term funding source that blesses your church for generations to come? The LCMS Foundation was created to provide professional investment services to LCMS churches, schools, and RSOs. They've helped hundreds of congregations create and grow endowments using investments tailored to each congregation's unique goals and needs, and now they'd like to help yours. Learn more at lcmsfoundation.org/podcast. Now on to our conversation with Peter Reske and Jeff Blersch. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you with us today. Today is the first of what I hope will be a number of special episodes where I have a very special celebrity co-host that many of you know from previous episodes. Peter Reske, our Senior Editor of Music and Worship here at CPH, is joining me as we chat with Dr. Jeffrey Blersch. So, Peter, welcome to your new quasi-role as a co-host.
Well, thanks for having me back, and I hope the power does not go to my head.
We'll keep our fingers crossed on that front.
Right.
Jeff, welcome to the podcast. It's nice to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So, Peter, do you want to start, or actually, before we go, how about this? For our listeners who may not be familiar with your work, Jeff, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? I know you started playing as a church organist when you were 8. Is that right?
That's true.
And so you've had a long and distinguished career as a church musician, a composer, professor. Tell us a little bit about your background, and then Peter will jump in.
Well, I like Elizabeth said, I started playing at my home congregation, Peace Lutheran in Cincinnati, when I was 8 years old. I kind of fell into that role like a lot of organists do. I had started taking some lessons when I was about 6, and our church organist had taught me how to read some bass clef and read from the hymnal, and started by playing some hymns while she took communion, subbing for her on occasion, and she decided that it was time for her to step away from that role because she had just had a new child. And the elders in the church said, "Okay, kid, you're up." My parents didn't really want to let me do that, but they agreed to let me do it on a kind of short-term interim basis, which wound up lasting about 10 years until I left for college. So music really has always been part of what I do, and church music has certainly been a big part of that. In college, I majored in music education and organ with the thought that I was going to be a high school band director. Somewhere along the line, I decided that elementary school music and elementary teaching was really where I would prefer to teach. And so after graduation, I did that for a couple of years until Concordia Ann Arbor had a posting for a position in the music department for someone with specialties in organ and elementary music education. And so that kind of opened the door for me teaching at Concordia's, and I've been doing that for 31 years now. 9 years in Ann Arbor and 22 here in Concordia and Seward.
What advice would you have for an elementary student, a high school student who's considering a career in church music?
Dig in. First of all, dig in as much as you can. I always tell prospective music students, take every opportunity that you can to make music in any setting possible. Looking back on my own background, I wish I had stretched my boundaries just a little bit more as an early child or as a young child. So I think taking that opportunity to make music as much as possible is really, really important. And I also tell them to try to find networking opportunities. That's a little bit easier now than when I was a kid. As an organist, especially, we like to sit behind our little box, in our console and our keyboards. But it's important to find others who share the same passion and the same interest as you. And various social media groups can do that. Various professional organizations can do that. Lutheran Summer Music. Many of our students have attended there and had wonderful experiences there too. So those are my biggest piece of advices. In addition to finding a good teacher and a mentor early on, that's a really important part of the process too.
Yeah. So Jeff, you said you started playing organ at age 8 or thereabouts.
Yep.
So were you playing with the pedals right away?
Not right away. No, I couldn't reach them.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
No, when I first started playing, my dad wanted to learn how to play, and so he had. This was the 70s, so he went down to the local Lowry piano and organ shop and got a little home organ for our house. And I would sit there and just sort of noodle around at the keyboards. But I couldn't reach the pedal board. And when I started playing on our church organ, I couldn't either, because I had to sit on the Cincinnati phone book to see the music rack, which was back in those days, it was about that thick to boost me up. So there was no pedal work at first, just keyboarding.
Yeah. So when did you start composing?
That wasn't something I really got interested in until I was about 25. Okay. When I first moved to Ann Arbor. I heard a colleague of mine, Don Williams, play a service when I first moved there, and he had the most spectacular hymn introductions. And after the service, I just said, "Well, Don, those were terrific hymn introductions. Where were they? I want to get those." Yeah. And he said, "Oh, I don't know. I just made them up." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I just make stuff up." And I said, "Well, you've got to teach me how to do that." And another friend of mine in Ann Arbor was also getting involved in writing music with this newfangled software called Finale. At the time, it was Finale 2.0 way back when. And so I kind of put two and two together and started trying my hand at being creative and writing my own things.
Yeah. So
I was just going to say, just for those of us who are not composers or musicians, give us just the 30,000 level view of what Finale is and how you use it. No, that's great. I've heard our music team talk about it a lot, and I know it's important. So just a quick overview of what it is.
There are several, many and various music software programs, notation programs that just allow you to basically create a musical manuscript on your computer. That's what Finale does. It's one of the industry standard software programs. I know that's what CPH uses. Right. It was really just about the only one available back in the mid 90s that was worth anything. So that's the one I learned on.
Yeah. So it sounded like improvisation was how your composition started.
It was. That's right.
Yeah. And so with CPH, you've published 10 volumes of this series with the catchy title, Introductions, Harmonizations, Accompaniments, Interpretations. I'm guessing a lot of those grew out of just that kind of thing, right?
They did, and I have to give David Johnson credit for the catchy title.
Yeah, I think we should.
I'm not one for titles, as you know. Those all started from improvisations that I had done in in chapel at Concordia Ann Arbor,
Okay.
the first couple of volumes. And when I was preparing to leave that campus, I wanted to write some of those improvisations down and give them to my students as kind of a farewell gift. So I did that and took it to our local Kinko's and had them spiral bound.
Yeah.
And gave them to the students as I left. Then I sent them to David Johnson and said, "Hey, would you maybe be interested in some of these?" And he said, "Let's make it a series." And
Right.
I thought, "Whoa, okay, that means I have to do more."
Yep. So did you know it was going to be 20 years and 10 volumes or whatever?
No, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea where it would go. It was a fun process to try to recreate some things that I had done in various services and write them down and see if they could be useful.
So how is your composition process different when it's, say, writing a piece for choir as opposed to an organ improvisation kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I'm writing something for organ, it usually starts at the organ.
Yeah.
I'll sit at the organ and I'll work through a couple of ideas, and then I'll take them to my computer and try to flesh them out that way. If I'm writing a choral piece, it usually starts with some sort of a melody or a motive in my head that might happen while I'm taking a walk or during faculty meeting or something like that. And you can edit that out, right? And then I take that idea to my computer and work it out. So an organ piece is worked out largely at the organ, and anything else is worked out largely in front of my computer with my keyboard in front of me.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you working on now?
Right at this very second. I just finished a few things. So right now there is actually nothing on the plate.
We can change that, Jeff.
Just summer vacation, Right now, actually, I'm doing more practicing than writing, getting ready for some upcoming recitals that I have this summer.
Okay.
Go ahead, Peter.
I was going to transition to what you're doing this summer, but
before we jump to that place, I, as just a consumer of your music, I love the duet series that you've done, the 2 volumes of duets.
Oh, thank you.
What was that like? Like, how did you decide I'm going to write these pieces for duet and jump into that? Because they're amazing.
Thank you. That was a really fun project to work on. It started because my wife, Carla, is an organist and a pianist too. And over the years, we've enjoyed playing some piano 4-hands arrangements. And we realized that there's just not a lot out there that we particularly liked. There were some volumes that we've purchased over the years, but we've played through them enough that Carla said to me one day, you ought to try writing some of these so we have some new pieces to learn. And so I thought, oh, okay. I never really thought about doing that, but I'll give it a shot. And so I started working on one, and Carla and I played through it. And then I called Peter one day and said, would you be interested in something like this? And he said, yeah. And that's what turned into the piano duets for Christmas, which then turned into piano duets for Easter. And a little shameless self-promotion here. My colleague Elizabeth Grimpo and I recorded those last summer, all 10 of them, and they're available on streaming platforms near you.
We will drop a link to those in the show notes because they really are so much fun to listen to.
Thank you.
All right, Peter, back to the summer. Yeah.
Well, tell us about recording those piano duets, and you've also recorded some organ albums, so some solo organ albums. What is that process like? You just do everything in one take, nail it, and walk away?
Elizabeth will agree with me on this. I'm sure that no, that's not really what happened. we both find it's really challenging to record something because you want it to be just absolutely perfect, just the way you want it. And live performance isn't always 100% perfect. And that's where a good sound engineer and editor comes in really handy. At Concordia, we've worked with Cleet Baker from Omaha for nearly 25 years now. He's a wonderful recording artist, recording engineer, I should say, and editor, has ears like a hawk, and is really, really fun to work with. So Cleet comes in and records with us. We did the piano duets over a 2-day series, so we did 5 on each day, which was about the right call because by the end of the 5th one, we had about had it for that day. So we did 2 days of recording for those. And then we spent a day up in Cleet's studio in Omaha editing the various takes together to create the final product.
So on those albums, who played primo, who played secondo, and did you switch?
Elizabeth was always primo.
Okay.
Because she's primo.
Yeah. So
when Carla and I play duets, I'm always the bass. So that's what I did.
So you didn't have to learn the other part.
Right, exactly.
So when there's 2 pianists at the piano, who gets the pedals?
I did, and I'm not really a pianist. I'm an organist.
Yeah.
So I had to rely on Elizabeth for a lot of this, but she said it's standard practice for the secondo player to do the pedal.
Yeah. So is that because your right foot is in position?
I think so. It was really easy for me to reach.
Yeah.
Even though I'm sitting to the left of center.
Yeah. I also wondered if it could be because if you're pedaling harmonically and the bass kind of drives the direction the harmony goes, it could be that. But I bet it's more your right foot is in closer position.
I think it's probably reach. There were some challenges with that because there were places in some of those pieces where if I'm thinking about only my part, I would pedal instinctively a little bit differently than if I'm thinking about both parts together.
Right.
And then we had to realize, oops, I shouldn't have done that. And let's try it again.
So you really have to become one 4-handed beast playing that piano.
Right.
Yeah. Well, as Elizabeth said, the albums are they're really fantastic. So I think it turned out marvelously.
Thank you. I was really it was a fun project last summer.
Yeah. So this summer we have the LCMS Institute on Liturgy, Preaching, and Church Music, and it's being hosted at Concordia, Nebraska.
It is in a few weeks.
Yeah. So first, can you tell us a little bit about your new music building? I haven't seen it yet, so a couple weeks from now, I'm going to see it for the first time.
It's beautiful.
You've been here, Elizabeth?
I have. I had a chance to see it, a few months ago, and it's spectacular.
Right. Yeah, we're approaching the 1-year move-in anniversary. It was sometime at the end of July last year where we got to take occupancy of the building. And actually, those piano duets for Easter and for Christmas, as soon as we got to move in and had the piano back here, that's the first thing we did in the building was record those duets. But we went through a 27-month construction process, which was about 13 months longer than it was supposed to be, where half of our building was raised and replaced with a more modern facility that allowed us to do a couple of things. Number one, it allowed us to make the facility accessible for all, which was how this project started. We needed a building that was accessible, and our 1960s split level building just didn't provide that. We also had experienced growth in our department, and we needed more practice rooms and more teaching studios. We also had some significant sound problems that did not allow us to meet hearing safety standards in our old building that needed to be corrected. And so this new facility allows us to correct all those problems, plus positions us for future growth. So it's been a blessing for us. And it's been a huge blessing to be back under one roof again, as opposed to being spread all over the town of Seward.
So the big organ, what did you do with the big organ during the construction?
The console was removed.
Okay.
The organ was, for lack of a better term, shrink wrapped and vacuum sealed.
Yeah.
The Cassavant, the builder, and our technicians, Beatty and Organ from Lincoln, said that the best thing to do during a long construction process was just to protect it as good as you can. And so Beatty did a great job of securing the instrument, hooking it up to some negative pressure filters. Our campus maintenance staff was terrific. Every Friday they would come in and change the filter on these blowers to try to keep the dust out of there as much as possible. And when they unshrink wrapped, if that's a term, the organ last summer, I was absolutely floored at how clean it was inside. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
They did a great job with it.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing it again this summer.
We were happy to hear it again, too.
Yeah, I bet.
Well, and the campus, the new music building is an all Steinway building, correct?
We are working towards
that.
Steinway school. We're not quite there yet,
Okay.
but that is a goal in our long-term music department plan.
So this summer at the Worship Institute, what will you be doing?
Three things. Number one, I'm playing one of the recitals at the Institute, which will be half Bach and half my music.
The two Bs?
Right. I often thought that I grew up playing Bach, and I love Bach. But my middle name is Neil. It doesn't start with S. I often thought that my parents should have named me something with an S for a middle name. That would have been kind of fun. But so I'll be playing that recital. I'm teaching an organ masterclass on hymn playing, and I'm leading a sectional on creative hymn playing.
Okay. So at the recital, how will it work? Do you play one Bach thing, then one Blersch thing, or is it half then half?
I decided to do the Bach first, and then do my stuff at the end. That way, if people don't want to hear my stuff, they can leave early.
Peter, don't leave early.
Oh, no.
Well, it is kind of tough, though, because we will have three recitals going at the same time at three different locations.
Yeah.
And so, you have to choose one or the other. So I imagine there'll be some people that'll decide to I'll go to half of this one and half of another one.
Yeah. And you won't take it personally.
No.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Bach was one of your favorite composers. I'll ask the question, who is your favorite composer?
I don't know if I can really answer that very
Yeah.
well. An old teacher of mine used to say that choosing your favorite piece of music or choosing your favorite composer is like walking into a bakery and choosing your favorite donut. And I can relate to that very well. I can't choose my favorite donut, and I can't really choose my favorite piece either or composer. It depends on the situation, I suppose.
Right. And it probably changes throughout your life or throughout your career. And
yeah. Yeah, very much. I go in phases.
Yeah. I'll ask a slightly different question then. Who is an unsung composer that you think deserves more play or more performance?
Ooh.
Is this you looking for new music, Peter?
No, I'm just curious.
It's a great question. It's a great question though, because we have some fabulous church musicians and musicians throughout the synod. So I'm curious.
So you're talking about current or past, or
it could be anybody. Yeah, it could be somebody from the past that you think is really fantastic, and these works should get more life.
Boy, that's a really tough question.
Yeah.
I recently discovered some chorale preludes on IMSLP
Okay.
by a composer, Homelius. There are 40 some of those chorale preludes.
Okay.
And I thought these are really, really charming pieces. And over the last 3 years or so, I've pulled some out to give to my students, and they have all really enjoyed them too.
Yeah.
They have a kind of classical charm to them, even though they're Baroque pieces. And so I need to explore more of those, I think.
Yeah.
So that's one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
From the past anyway. And as far as current composers, I really like finding ways of stretching the organ a little bit and doing some things that we don't typically do as church organists. So I enjoy listening to that.
Yeah. Have you had students that have gone on to become composers?
Yes. I'm thinking of one of my students right now. He's been posting some videos on YouTube. Caleb Stair,
Okay.
graduated maybe 10 years ago. He attended a film scoring school in Valencia in Spain. And I've enjoyed listening to what he's writing. And he's got some recordings of orchestral, actually orchestral pieces that he's written for film scores up on his YouTube page, which are really interesting.
Yeah, that's exciting. So that former or potential band director in you can appreciate those orchestral film scores.
Oh yeah, very much. I really like film scores. I think they're some of the best music being written today. I teach our second year music theory courses here at Concordia, and our spring semester course that I teach always ends with as much film score analysis as we can fit in, just because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, that is. I think that is a great idea. I kind of feel like film scores now are kind of like what opera was, let's say in the 19th century. A more popular medium, something people would go into kind of knowing what to expect and look for certain tropes and ideas. And similarly with music. And I will say I keep up more or less with film scores, but I've heard similar things about video game scoring.
Oh yeah.
Which I'll confess I know nothing about, but I'd be interested to listen, even if not play the games.
I'm learning some from my students.
Yeah.
The last project that my students do in Theory 4 is that they find a piece of film music or video game music. Some of them have asked if they could do that, and I say sure.
Yeah.
And they talk about various influences that they hear inside of that music, and it's been really interesting to learn about video game music, which I also really know very little about.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how in addition to the video game scores, how your students influence you in your composing and in your music?
It's really interesting. My colleagues and I here at Concordia talk about this a lot, that we learn from our students, I think, just about as much as they learn from us. In music theory, it might be an offhanded comment that somebody makes about what they're hearing or how they're hearing a particular piece of music that I have never thought of before, that really just sort of blows my mind. In organ lessons, it may be somebody coming in with a hymn improvisation idea, and they're going to tell me their idea first before they play it. And I'm thinking to myself, this will never work. And then they do it. And I say, well, guess what? It worked, and it was really clever. You proved me wrong. Thank you. I grow from hearing their ideas just as much as I hope that they grow from hearing my ideas.
So you mentioned at the LCMS Institute coming up this summer that you're going to be talking about, did you say like improvisation or playing?
We've called it a session on creative hymn playing.
Yeah.
Is what they've asked me to do.
Yeah, can you tell us more about creative hymn playing a la Jeffrey Blersch?
Sure. For me, it all starts with the text, and that's going to be the premise of the workshop. There was a pastor at a church that I played for years ago that came up to me after a service, and he said, Jeff, I think that if I decided not to preach a sermon one week, that would be okay because you preach while you play.
Wow.
And then he went on to say, but I'm not going to do that. Don't worry. Um, but I've always considered that to be one of the highest compliments I've ever received. And it's been kind of an eye-opening statement, and it's been a slogan of mine for a while, preach while you play. Because we know, Peter, of course, that a hymn is a strong text that is carried by the melody. And so my premise is that our musical decision-making needs to be almost entirely informed by the text. Musicians are always making decisions when they play music, but we shouldn't make them in absence of the text. And that means two different things. Number one, there are some basic things that aren't necessarily creative, but that should be informed by the text, such as tempo, articulation, and so forth. But there are also a lot of creative things that you can do to draw people's attention to the text, much the same way that a film scorer might use certain timbres to draw an audience into a particular scene. Music and timbre carries meaning. It's not just something that's neutral. And so timbres, chords, descants, textures, they all can play into how you can create some variety in your hymn playing, but not just for the sake of variety, but for the sake of emphasizing the text in the hymn.
Yeah, I thought it was really great how you said you want to draw attention to the text, not to the organist, not to the pianist, not to. So, what kinds of things, if we're sitting there in the pew and we're singing the hymn, or let's say maybe you're playing a prelude or something, what kinds of things should we listen for?
Well, one of the probably most obvious things, and one of the easiest things to learn, even as a student, or one of the things to hear the easiest, is color, or what we call timbre. That the great thing about the organ is that it can make just about any sound you want it to, and its only limits are the imagination of the organist. And so learning to use different colors and different combinations of stops on the organ can be a really effective tool, just like an orchestrator can use different instrumental combinations to achieve a certain goal. So you can make the organ sound light and bright and kind of carefree and effortless, or it can sound majestic. It can sound very reflective. It can sound very heavy and dark and brooding.
Yeah.
All depending on what the text is calling for.
So as you're playing, should I be thinking, okay, that sounds different. Why is he doing that? Or is it more like ideally, the synthesis is stronger. Something's happening where we've reached that point in the text, and it's magnifying it. It's you know what I mean?
Hopefully that's the way it works.
Right.
So it doesn't really draw attention to itself and doesn't distract from what's going on in hymn singing.
Yeah.
But rather raises it to a new level of understanding that what the music is doing can help you understand or experience that text a little bit better.
Yeah, or experience it differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely, there are times when I've been in the pew singing and organists have given me a really delightful surprise that highlights something in this text that I hadn't considered or thought about.
Right. Right. And as a musician, for me, now that can, obviously, I'll be the first to admit that for me and my analytical mind, that can be a little bit distracting.
Yeah.
But that's just because I'm thinking, ooh, what was that they just did?
Right. Yeah. So,
Peter, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to change the subject a bit. A kind of hot topic among church musicians right now is what we play from. And what I mean is, do we play from paper or do we play from a tablet? And so our listeners understand, I'm not talking about like pre-recorded music or, digital samples or something like that. I'm basically talking about the sheet music. Mm-hmm. Does the organist play from a printed sheet music, a traditionally printed book, or from a tablet? And I think if our listeners just kind of look around a bit, whether in the concert hall or like on a concert stage at a recital, symphony players at church, you're seeing more and more and more musicians playing from tablets. So what are your thoughts on that, Jeff?
Let me reach over here for a second. Sitting right next to me
Yep.
is my iPad. Keep it plugged in on my desk here at Concordia. That's something that I've just started to experiment with in the last year.
Okay.
Is playing from a tablet, and I have done it some. I'm not to the point yet where I feel 100% comfortable with it.
Yeah.
I think it is something that, at least for me, being an old guy, requires a little bit of learning to pick up. And I'm trying to figure out different ways of dealing with page turns when you're on the organ too. So it's definitely a growing trend. When I see my daughter sing at the University of Nebraska, more than half of the choir is singing from a tablet rather than printed music. When I see professional musicians play on all sorts of different instruments, they're playing from tablets more often than sheet music. And I keep thinking to myself, wouldn't it be great if LSB was available for my tablet too, so that I could pull up all of the hymns for the service and preload them into Fourscore.
Have them in order, right?
And have them on the right order and just go, 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 go. That would be just great.
Yeah.
Peter, do we need to run a poll in the Lutheran Musicians Group? Tablet versus sheet music?
Oh yeah, I think we should.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's really intriguing. I like it. I get nervous just because I'm somebody who has some techno glitches.
Yeah.
My students know that in my classes a lot. And technology sometimes has far surpassed my understanding. And so that part makes me nervous. And the good old fashioned sheet music is more of a comfort sometimes to me.
Right.
But I am experimenting with it. So
what is your current preferred method for page turns on your tablet?
I tried experimenting with Fourscore has not in the free version, but in the paid version, they've started doing this thing where you can program facial gestures to turn a page, like you can wink or head nod or something like that. But that I find that I make weird facial gestures when I play. and sometimes it interprets that the wrong way and turns my page. So I read another something online about these little a little ring that you can wear.
Okay.
And you can just sort of tap it with your thumb like this.
Yeah.
And it's a little Bluetooth connector, like a Bluetooth pedal, but it's on your finger. And they're pretty cheap, though. So my next thought is I'm going to order one of those and just try that. And see what happens.
Yeah. Again, for our listeners, one of the popular ways is with a Bluetooth pedal. So just a little pedal sits down on the floor, connects to the tablet. This works really well, let's say for string players or wind players. A little trickier for pianists, although I've seen plenty of pianists do it, and definitely trickier for organists.
Yes. The ideal, this is tricky for me, somebody who plays different instruments a lot. The ideal, though, is to have on your organ one of your toe studs programmed as a Bluetooth connector to your tablet. So you just keep hitting the toe stud to turn your page,
right,
and off you go. But
I've definitely learned something today. I had no idea that there was this hot debate between sheet music and tablets. So
for me, it's more of a curiosity. I think people definitely have their preferences one way or the other. If you're a gigging musician, it's really handy to have all your scores in PDF on your tablet, and you can make a set list really fast. I can see playing for a wedding, playing for a funeral. That would be so handy to have kind of all your pieces that you would typically play on your tablet already ready to go, and you can create a unique set list from there.
Yeah. Any concerns about the battery dying?
As long as you remember to charge it, it should be fine.
Right. Yeah. That's what I say. If you have it charged, or if you're at an organ, you could even have it plugged in.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I heard one story of a professional chamber musician. He was playing at his own university or whatever recital hall, playing from a tablet, and he forgot to put it in airplane mode.
Oh, no.
And now you're expecting this story to say he got some sort of notification or whatever. But instead, as he got to the recital hall, the tablet recognized the Wi-Fi, connected, and then decided to install updates. So he just had to wait patiently while the updates installed. And
See, I'm afraid that's the sort of thing that would happen to me. But
all right, Peter, as we start to wrap up, what's your last burning question?
My last burning question.
Because I know you could go all day. So
yeah, I could go all day. Jeff, what advice do you have for people in the pew? What advice do you have for people in the pew in terms of supporting their church musicians?
Oh, that's a really good question. Being a church musician is an interesting thing. It's kind of like when I was an elementary school music teacher, because I was the only music teacher in my school. So in some ways you feel like you're kind of doing your own thing. And especially in churches where I've played at, where you were in the balcony, and by the time the service is done, a lot of people are gone. So I would say this advice for church musicians as well as people in the pew: find time to interact with each other. Find time in Bible class, coffee hour, socially, just to get to know one another. To talk to one another and be part of the body of Christ together. That's how the community is really formed.
Well,
that's good advice.
I like that. Yeah, it's just great advice in general, isn't it?
Well, I'm just thinking about our church, our organist, who is practicing with the choir before the service, and then during the service, when he's done after the service, he's shuffling off to the next thing. And it's when you think about it, it's hard to catch some of those church workers to actually have a conversation and build that community. It
is. And for church workers, as with any profession, a little encouragement goes a long way. None of us are in this game for our own glory. We all want to serve the church. But it's a great help, of course, to just get to know people that you're working with, and the people that you work with is your congregation.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff.
Jeff, thanks for joining us today. Peter, thanks for coming in to do the heavy lifting of hosting for us.
Yep, my pleasure.
For our listeners, we will link to several of Jeff's recordings in the show notes, as well as some of his music pieces that we talked about on this episode, so that you can go in and learn more about that. Jeff, thanks so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
All right, listeners, till next time. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Concordia Publishing House Podcast. I pray that this time was valuable to your walk with Christ. We'd love to connect with listeners on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Concordia Pub. Visit cph.org for more resources to grow deeper in the gospel.